Good morning, guys. How are you all?
Thank you. Great. I assume you're living the dream, Phil?
I am always living the dream.
Yeah. Leaving the dream or living the dream?
Living the dream.
Yeah.
Are we ever in it?
By his choice, no.
That would be living the nightmare if that was the case. When I was a little kid and my aunt was watching me, and she would need to go shopping for something, and we have to go and get this. I'm like, okay, and you get dragged along. Then she'd go by a store and go, I'm going to go in there and look at this dress. When you're like 7 or 8, that's like the worst 10 minutes of your life when you're just aimlessly in a store when your aunt is looking at a dress and you have zero interest at all. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, I learned I haven't outgrown that. And I learn this every time I go anywhere where there's, when you walk into like a shop, you're doing stuff. You're whatever. You're going from a restaurant to a bar or whatever, and you walk. Someone goes into the shop, and it's usually your wife, by the way, and not your wife, Bill, but anybody's wife. And they do that shopping walk where you're not really intending to buy anything. You're just kind of bouncing around slowly in the store. I just can't stand that still. All these years later. I hate to go into a store when I know I'm not going to buy anything, and you're just looking at stuff.
And in the old days, Rob, there used to be a bench out in front of the store.
Yeah.
You could go out and leave and sit on the bench. They don't have them anymore.
The bench isn't there. Yeah, I was looking for the bench because I went outside. I'm like, I can't believe this. 50-something years later, I still hate walking into a store.
In department stores, that's called the shoe department. So I just go, I find a back corner of a shoe department, and I sit there.
There's always a seat in the shoe department.
Yeah, and have a fine time. You know where I will be.
There was no shoes in these places here. This is stuff that you just kind of like, I don't need. I'm not going to buy it. Why am I in this store? I got to wait for my wife and my son's fiance to finish looking at things that they're not going to buy either.
And so being a diligent husband or caring husband and a future father-in-law, you did what you're supposed to do. Right?
No, I left the store. I go stand out front. I just find something else to stare at.
So you got a wedding coming up in the family. Are you into the wedding selection stuff? All of that?
That's so funny. No, I'm into the. Is it our turn this month to make the wedding payment? That's what I'm into. That's my job here, and as of late, trying to put out the flooring disaster that's going on in our house right now. Phil, this newly appointed guy to the Jefferson County Commission here, Dr. James Cook. His wife is a Steeler fan. He became a Steeler fan by association. He told me when I had a telephone conversation with him recently, or text exchange, whatever it was. And
I heard extortion, but
there's an argument between Gilstrap and I. Is it better to be born into it or to kind of acquire that loyalty as you go along in life? What do you think, Phil? When did you become a Steeler fan?
I became a Steeler fan when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. My dad, as a coal miner, went on an annual union meeting to Pittsburgh. And the UMWA went up there every year for a conference or whatever it was that they had done. And Dad brought me back something with Pittsburgh Steelers on it every time he went. And my dad was a big Dallas fan, huge Dallas Cowboy fan. But he brought me back something every year from Pittsburgh, which turned into pajamas with feet in them. Remember those pajamas that had the little feetsies in them?
Yep.
Well, we couldn't find those at home, so he just got me a bigger size every year. So every picture you see me, I have it like in the mornings for Christmas and so forth. I had this Steelers stuff with feet in them. And I was probably 9 or 10 years old before I realized my dad didn't really like Pittsburgh. He was a big Dallas Cowboy fan. So the only fandom that I shared with my dad was the Lakers, which I've completely moved off that. But was the Lakers, but we were bitter rivals. And to Dad's credit, he never discouraged my black and gold blood. Now, growing up in southern West Virginia, most people down there are Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and it's probably because everybody's dad worked in the coal mines. Everybody's father was also union, and everybody's father went on that conference every year. It's hard to tell what those guys were doing up there, but they went up there every year and came back with a bunch of Pittsburgh Steelers stuff.
Were the games broadcast to your hometown?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Now, Cincinnati was actually closer, I think, distance-wise, but our local games, because, of course, you didn't have all these, you got a local game. It was always Pittsburgh. We always got the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I know I was surprised when I started calling games around here and working locally here in 1990, when I would go to a high school game, how many Steeler jerseys were in the stands. And that was because NBC 25, back when NBC had the AFC contract, the station out of Hagerstown broadcast Steeler games as the regional team and created a lot of Steeler fans around here. That kind of shocked me because this area here is closer, much closer, obviously, to Washington Redskins at the time, and the Ravens didn't exist in 1990. They didn't exist yet. Cleveland didn't move until about 7 years later.
Wonder why TV 25 covered the Steelers as opposed to the Redskins.
Well, they were an NBC affiliate, and remember the Colts had left. So Baltimore would have been the next closest affiliate, but the Colts had left for Indianapolis. So there was no other AFC team. So the closest teams would have been Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. Philadelphia would have been an NFC team. NBC had the AFC contract, so Philadelphia was out. So the next closest team was Pittsburgh.
Understand that, John?
I understand it. I don't care, but I understand
Regional rights.
He gets tired of talking in sports ball to open up.
That sports ball can be awkward.
No, I grew up an avid Washington Redskins fan, and back, but these are the days of Sonny Jurgensen and got Charlie Taylor, Chris Hamburger.
Billy Kilmer.
Billy Kilmer. He was I was a Sonny Jurgensen guy, but then it just once it became actually Moneyball, and once the players lost team loyalty, and I lost interest in the game.
Understand that in that era, it's not that the players had team loyalty. They were bound legally to the team. If you wanted to leave, you had to sit out an entire year if you weren't traded. That's not team loyalty. That's indentured servitude.
As a kid, I didn't know that. And they had other businesses too. They had. It was great. RFK Stadium. You go there for a Dallas Cowboys game, and it would rock. I mean, the stadium would move.
Yeah, because that upper level was like on shocks, or the lower level, I guess. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, Phil, let's talk a little money here. First and foremost, today is the split for NVIDIA, a 10-for-1 split. Maybe you could explain to our listeners why, and viewers, a stock splits.
Well, now it really doesn't have the fundamental impact that it used to have. And I've told a few of our clients that this fundamentally means nothing. This is not a signal to go buy NVIDIA stock. But one of the bigger reasons that they would do that is so it's more affordable for employees to participate in stock purchase plans. What it does to it, though, and as I talked, there's one in particular, I cannot get him off of wanting to buy more of this just because of the split. But what it does do is it increases volatility. And why it increases volatility, it opens it up to retail investors or smaller investors, and something that's little talked about, options contracts. Options contracts have to be purchased in lots of 100. So now that it's 120, 121 a share, whatever it's going to open up at today, opposed to $1,200 per share, if you purchase or sell an options contract, think of selling it short, you have to do that in lots of 100. So before that was over $100,000. Now it's a lot less. It's 10,000 or what have you. So it could increase volatility. And then back to that old saying that I like to say anyway is volatility isn't always a bad thing. When things are going up, it's not a negative thing. So fundamentally, maybe perception-wise, it opens it up to a lot of younger retail investors that simply doesn't have that much money to buy, a few shares of stock. It's traded around $900 to $1,200 per share in this year, in the last few months, actually. So it does open it up to retail investors, but fundamentally means absolutely nothing. Probably more importantly, fundamentally, is they also increase their dividend at the last earnings. So fundamentally, that's probably more appropriate to say, hey, this means something. But the stock split in itself, absolutely nothing, other than you can get more shares of it if you're a stock purchase plan inside of NVIDIA.
It's down a bit more than 0.5% this morning, pre-market trading, and stock market opens regular market in 40 minutes. Next question, Phil, is what is aftermarket and pre-market trading? Who can do that? Who participates in that?
Well, everybody kind of participates in it if you put a order in at the close. So let's look at NVIDIA back in February. And NVIDIA, we've been talking so much about that company. NVIDIA announced its earnings at 4:30 after the close in February. Does it most times anyway. After the close in February, and that was the point where its market capitalization and overnight trading increased more so than that of the entire market cap of Bank of America. I think that's a cool little stat that they had over in overnight trading. But what that was people putting in orders at the open, people trading overseas, but those don't execute until the very next morning. So they're really just orders sitting there waiting to trigger or happen in overnight trade. So they haven't occurred yet. There's just someone that says, hey, I'm going to do this. And in some cases, it's algorithms by mutual funds saying, hey, if this reaches this point at the close, we have to sell it or we have to buy it, and that occurs overnight. So there's an algorithm, a computer model that says, hey, I'm going to trigger selling this, and therefore they're just waiting to happen at the open.
And on the CNBC website, there's a quote, this Fidelity portfolio manager says, NVIDIA has a huge moat and can keep rallying. Now, we know about Bill's moat. That's meant to keep ne'er-do-wells off the property. But what would a moat be when it applies to a company like NVIDIA?
I guess what he's saying is that negative information can't really get to it. There's a long way to go with artificial intelligence and its competitors. We're starting to talk a lot about NVIDIA's competitors, AMD, and I think Intel's another one that could come in and kind of interrupt their price point and their ability to sell it sell their product for as much as they're selling it for. So I think in those terms, that's what he's talking about as a moat.
Bill, you look like you had a question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to absorb all of it. I'm not sure I have a question I can frame just now, but I find it interesting, this concept of a moat. But it does bring another question. Who are the real competitors for NVIDIA? You mentioned two, but in what areas are there competition besides this very broad artificial intelligence, which can mean a lot of different things?
Yeah, it means a lot of different things. And quite honestly, I don't understand how you monetize art. I'm starting to understand it more, but to have a complete understanding on how they monetize that, it's too technological for me. But I know that NVIDIA's technology is far and above everyone else, and that's why everybody's purchasing it, but they don't own it. So those like AMD and Intel, I think Intel is another big player, they can step up and start to copycat that or create that same thing and sell it and create more competition. So therefore, maybe Facebook or Google, instead of buying NVIDIA's magic chip, they're going to buy it from Intel or AMD or Intel has another type of chip that they could purchase that does the same thing as NVIDIA, but do it at a lesser price. Just simply competition that may drive that price point of that NVIDIA is selling it for down, which would impact their profits. And I think in the context of the Fidelity Money Manager, that's what they're talking about, of the moats, that there's a long way to go before their competition starts to catch up.
Phil, the question doesn't have a lot to do with what we talked about, but it's a point of interest. NVIDIA is a U.S. company in the Silicon Valley, yet it deals in chips. We think of chips being primarily Taiwan. What's the association between Taiwan as a chip manufacturer and NVIDIA as a chip, not a producer, but a utilizer?
I don't have a good answer for you other than I think they get some of the materials from Taiwan to create those chips. So when we think about vehicles, sometimes look at a General Motors vehicle. I had someone point out to me at one point, if you look at a VIN number, it will tell you where all the parts came from, or you can see it on the sticker. I think that's the case with NVIDIA as well, with some of these little parts or these lithium or materials that they obtain to make the chips.
I want to go back to what's important in my life, which is football. I looked this up. Sonny Jurgensen, his highest salary while he was with Washington Redskins. Anybody want to guess?
$220,000.
$40,000.
150. $150,000, which is the equivalent of $648,000 now. So things have changed over the years. Just thought I would throw that out. I happen to know this number.
Television changed that.
Thanks.
TV money.
Thanks to Google. Hey, listen, Phil, I almost sent you this article to talk about it today, but I got distracted and didn't. The Wall Street Journal over the weekend had an article. It's called Economic Data Paint a Picture of Two Different Americas. The jobs report that came out last week shows we added 272,000 jobs, which is wonderful. And we have very low unemployment and what have you. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, they point out that Campbell's Soup, Pepperidge Farm, other snack brands are actually cutting back on their sales forecast, which is indicating that people of lower economic status are expecting they're not spending like they used to. The rich are spending a lot. Travel, the travel companies are doing really well. The service sector, hotels, cruise ships, they're doing really well. And they point out that while unemployment stands at 4% overall, unemployment among 20 to 24-year-olds is up to almost 8%, 7.9%, up from 6.3% a year ago. So if, in fact, if the data seems to show that the lower echelon of society, the people who are not making a lot of money, are really, really struggling, while the folks that have the strong portfolios, the NVIDIAs and the folks who have seen their 401ks grow and are thriving on their 3% mortgages, are doing very, very well. Is this a harbinger for bad things? Or do we have an economy that has no foundation? Is this going to collapse?
No, I mean, collapse may be a strong word, but when you said, is this a sign of trouble to come? And yes, it is. And it depends, because you had mentioned that last Friday we had the jobs report where we added 272, which was more than expected. Depends on your standpoint whether or not that was good or bad. And it is good. From an economic standpoint, it's good. But as we stare at our portfolio, it wasn't good, because what the Federal Reserve is looking for is cracks in the economy. So the Federal Reserve sees those clouds. They see these clouds coming where the younger or the entry-level position. Now, I like the ages. Can you give me those ages again where the unemployment rates are a little bit higher? Was it 20 to 24? Is that what you
20 to 24 is at 7.9, up from 6.3.
Yeah. There's a huge section of population that's being ignored. It's not being mentioned. I've only heard it mentioned a few times, and that may be the 16 to 20-year-olds that are making outstanding money for the jobs that they do, the summer jobs and the part-time jobs and the high school kids that are willing to work, and that is fueling part of this economy. And then I'll take it to the other end of the spectrum, and those are people that are in retirement or transitioning in retirement. And I had a great example of this. Just this past weekend, I was in South Carolina. In Myrtle Beach, we took a short trip, and an Uber driver picked me up, and he was from Brooklyn, New York, but he was driving an Uber. He had moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for retirement, and he's driving an Uber in his spare time. And he said, I used to do it just one day a week to get out of the house and give my wife a break, but now I make so much money because of inflation. I make so much money doing this. I don't really need it, but I find it hard not to do it 3 or 4 or 5 days a week, just simply because of the amount of money that I'm making. And trust me, I took Ubers this weekend. It's more expensive than what it was 3 or 4 years ago when we used to Uber. And that made me think that other part of the population, he really isn't much different from that 16 to 20-year-old, because he doesn't really need the money. He's just doing it because it's hard to pass up. And it's the same thing with my daughter, who's 17. It's hard to pass up working at the ice cream stand. It's hard to pass up babysitting or whatever it is because of how much money or the expected money people are paying. So now he's back to working almost a full-time job simply because he doesn't want to pass up the money. And then I asked him, I got a little bit nosy, and I said, Michael, what do you do with the money if you don't really need it? You have your CSRS. He's part of the old CSRS retirement plan, and he had a TSP. And like he was doing really well. He said, we travel further and we spend more, and he just grinned. And that said something to me about what is currently going on in the economy with two sections of people that we really don't talk a lot about. those just entering the workforce, maybe that wouldn't have back in, say, 2015 or 2019, and those that have left the workforce that's working again simply because they don't want to pass up the money. And those two together are fueling some of this economy, this strong consumer that we see. And this week we haven't spoken yet and only got about a minute left, but this week with the CPI report and the Federal Reserve, that's going to give us a window in the dot plot, a window into when the Federal Reserve can start to relax things. And I think as long as those two classes exist, along with what you said, the people that are okay and they can withstand these higher prices, but as long as those two classes exist, the 16 to 20-year-old and those that have retired, as long as they exist and they continue to spend money and in part fuel the economy, I can't see how the Federal Reserve can cut rates this year. There's no reason to encourage the economy when you have that type of consumer strength.
That was a point you were making this morning, Phil, that they're still thinking 1 or 2 rates. But as this economic news continues to flow in, it would appear that based on the criteria that was already been set up by the Fed chairman, if they cut rates, it'll just be for the simple sake of cutting rates as opposed to needing to cut rates.
And could fuel inflation even more, yes.
Yeah, Phil's out of time, Bill, didn't you hear him? He said, "I gotta go. I gotta go."
Even though I had a short
Phil's gotta go. Good.
Okay. Short question: do we make anything of the fact that Texas Stock Exchange has been formed to compete with the New York Stock Exchange?
No, I think it's just how you track the overall economy. If it ever gains any ground and we use it and invest based off of it, I doubt it. It could be kind of like, in my mind, it could be kind of like the Dow 30, where I really don't look at the Dow. I couldn't tell you where the Dow trades at any point during the year because I don't pay much attention to it. I think that may be another one. You may see ETFs based off of it, and you could see some downside if people look at it and say, hey, it's negative, I should jump out, or if it's positive. But overall, I don't think it would have any impact, especially early on.
Phil, how do we reach you for more information today?
You can reach us at 304-263-4343 or stop by and see us with an appointment at 1270 Winchester Avenue right here in Martinsburg.
Phil, you have yourself a great day.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.
You can catch Phil McCoy each weekday morning at 6:38, replayed at 7:38. A couple of minutes on the market that just wrapped up the previous day and previewing what's coming up that particular day.